Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, let me present myself. My name is John Chamberlain. Although I have an English-sounding name, I actually live and work in Spain, and I work for a company called Gas Natural Fenosa. This afternoon, I'm going to have a talk with you over the next hour or so and a bit, looking at the use of LNG stroke natural gas as a maritime alternative and as a maritime fuel. To go along this conversation, I've split the talk up into 5 parts. First of all, I will present who is my company, because I think that will give you all a good understanding of where we are coming from. Then I will look at natural gas as a maritime fuel. Then I will address the LNG bunkering, and then I will just present a few of the projects that my company and myself is doing, and I will round it up with a few final reflections. To present myself, as I said, my name is John Chamberlain. I work in Gas Natural Fenosa. Gas Natural Fenosa is a utility, and I am the responsible person for all the technology innovation projects in the group, which cross a very broad range of subjects, and one of those subjects is the use of both gas and electricity in the transport sectors, and the transport sectors being maritime, terrestrial, and rail sector. So let me just quickly present my company, if I can work out how everything works here. Who are we? Now, Gas Natural Fenosa, the reason I'm going to put this slide up, I think, is I want you to understand from where my company and my perspective comes, because this really does orientate our conversation this afternoon. We are a very big gas and electricity utility in Spain. We're a very old company, over 170 years old, that started up by lighting gas lamps in Barcelona. But what I want to know is more than where we work. I'd like you to look at the bottom of the screen, and you will see that we are a benchmark operator in LNG. Well, as I will go through this talk, I will make a case out that Spain is actually one of the leaders in LNG. And as a company, to bring gas to Spain, we are an LNG operator. We own and operate methane carriers, which are the huge boats transporting LNG across the world. We bring it into Spain, and we own and operate, or we have shares in some regasification plants. So my input to this conversation today comes from more a point of view of a gas operator. We're not a marine company, we're not a port authority, we are a gas operator with a knowledge of gas, natural gas, and LNG. And this is really what I want to talk about this afternoon, is the aspects of the fuel. So I'm not going to talk that much about boats, and I'm not going to talk that much about ports. I'm going to make a case for natural gas as a future fuel in LNG and look around the subject in general. So let's go on to the hub of the conversation, and we're going to talk about natural gas as a maritime alternative. And here you have to forgive me, I am English, but I've lived in Spain a long time. I do mix and match my sentences, so I will apologize to the English speakers, but hopefully you will all understand me. If I'm going too quickly, you don't understand me, please send a question and I will slow down, etc., etc. This forum is for yourselves, more so than for myself, and any doubts, any questions, just launch the written question, tell me to slow down, tell me to repeat, not a problem at all. So the first thing we want to address is when one looks to consider fuels, is this a fuel that has a long life? It's a fuel that's going to be there to serve the investments that have to be made, because when you're looking in the maritime section, a boat has a long life of 30-40 years, and if we say to a boat owner, the boat should be fueled by LNG or by natural gas or by compressed natural gas, the question he will ask you says, well, will gas be available? I have a living to make, and I have to make sure that I can operate my boat. And the port infrastructures will say the same. Let's look at the case for natural gas. There are today proven reserves of over 60 years, and many people believe that these reserves will go out beyond 250 years. And this is because of what people call the shale gas revolution, which many of you would have heard of in the USA, where people have found a way of extracting gas from shale formations where you blast open the rocks and you extract the gas from the pores. But there is a glut and a considerable quantity of gas. When I was a youngster, people used to say that natural gas had the least reserves of all the fossil fuels. Today, that is not the case, and many believe there is far more natural gas available than petroleum. Also, the gas is widely available around the world, and we move it around, which I said before, as in a form of liquefied natural gas, which is LNG. It is a way of moving the gas across the continents. And today, the full infrastructure exists for this movement. So, as a coming point to this course, natural gas is available and will continue to be available as a fuel. Now, when people talk about gas quality, natural gas, the first thing I think I'm going to drop to the bottom of the slide. The bottom of the slide says it is not a refined product. To the difference of other fuels, they are refined. So you have crude oil and you refine the fuel oils. Natural gas is a natural product that comes out of the ground. And depending on where it comes from, its composition is slightly different. It is normally, natural gas is more than 80% methane and then has a different range of concentrations of the higher number elements, ethane, propane, etc., etc., etc. So the first thing to point out that natural gas from one country may well differ from natural gas to the other country. And when you consider its use as a fuel, this is a concept that's slightly different to other fuels. Engine manufacturers are known to like standardized products. They know that a diesel, a petrol, a medium fuel oil, a heavy fuel oil has a minimum specification. This question is a bit more vague in the world of natural gas, and we tend to define it looking at factors called Wobbe index, which is like it's really a calorific value of a gas. A methane number, which to give an understanding, is like the octane number of a fuel, and this varies. Now, this may well, the variation in the methane number can have an effect in an engine performance. And you can have, in poor quality gases, knocking, which is pre-ignition, and drop off in performance. So therefore, when you look to bring in a fuel like natural gas into the marine sector, there will be needed to be some logics in carefully to ensure that the gas that is used for a combustible fuel is of the adequate quality, and we also need to work with the manufacturers to understand what are the limitations of the gas. So the first message I want to put across, natural gas is a varying product, but it is a product still, even though that variation, it is still adequate for use as a transport. It is a fossil fuel as well, so there are CO2 emissions related to it being a fossil fuel, but in comparison with petroleum and coal-based products, it is the most CO2 friendly option. So a switch from oil to gas straight away gives you a CO2 saving. And in the world of gas, there is an area called biomethane that we may get onto later on, which can further reduce the CO2 footprint of that gas. But these are the factors that people use to define gas. But really, for the transport sector, we're going to say that natural gas has over 85% methane. Now, in the marine sector, everyone talks about LNG, which is liquefied natural gas. And all that we're talking about liquefied natural gas is that 1 meter cubed of LNG is equivalent to just slightly less than 600 meters cubed of natural gas atmosphere. LNG is the most efficient way of maximizing the energy content of the gas in a fixed size container. So in the fuel transport, where you want to get as much energy content of the fuel within a confined volume, LNG represents the way to go forward. First, but it has its drawbacks or its complications. First of all, it's a colourless, transparent, odourless liquid. So if there is a leak of LNG, you will not smell it. Natural gas has no smell, but the gas that you receive in your houses is actually odorized with a sulfur-containing element. But in LNG, there is no odor added to the gas. So therefore, you will not smell it. It's also a cryogenic liquid, and a cryogenic liquid brings a sort of complication and a certain set of risks that when one handles it, you have to be aware of, and you have to take into consideration in the design of the infrastructures and installations. Being cryogenic, it can cause frostbite, it can cause cracks in materials like mild steel. But let's look at it. Even though it is a cryogenic liquid, as a fuel, it is vastly different to a medium fuel oil or a heavy fuel oil used in the maritime section, and it has its complications, but as a front runner, as an overline issue, the technologies are there for its safe handling, and they've been there for the last 30, 40 years. Also, another factor about LNG when considering it as a fuel is there's an aging factor. An aging factor is really boil-off. The gas is really contained in, LNG is contained in a container, which is a very, very efficient thermos flask. So it maintains the liquid cold. There's no energy put into maintaining as a liquid. It is stored in a very highly isolated thermos flask, and that maintains liquid. But over time, you start to get boil-off of the lighter elements, which is methane, and you have to look and manage this gas in the usage. What I'd like to say here is when you look at LNG as a fuel for use in the transport sector, it's not a fuel that can sit in a tank for 3-4 months, because it will transform from liquid into gas and have to be vented. It's a fuel that it has to be used in a defined time window. But that is excellent for ferries, for boats, for industrial uses or lorries. But those are considerations we have to take into account to clearly understand its differences from other fuels. I have said that energy is a far more efficient way of putting a defined energy in a volume of natural gas, but one of its detriments that even though LNG is 600 times less volume than natural gas, on an energy basis, one equivalent of fuel oil requires 1.6 times a volume of LNG. It's not as dense, energetically speaking, as fuel oil. So when we look to introduce the fuel into transport sectors, we have to take into consideration that one of the downsides is that we will need more space to store the same amount of energy intensity within the fuel. So that's what I want to say is that if the boat wants to go 1,000 kilometers or a truck wants to go 1,000 kilometers, we need 1.6 times the storage volume of fuel. And we're all aware that in many transport authorities, volumes are restrictive, and this is a downside. Also, when we look at maritime workstations, even though I'm not going to talk about boats, from a safety point of view and a hazard identification point of view, it is most probably that tanks for energy will be stored outside, not down in the hull of a boat, but in the designs that they're making, they are stored outside. One of the things was in the very, very rare event of a loss, the gas would disperse into the atmosphere. Not a good sign, but in the middle of the sea, you wouldn't have an oil slick. You would have an issue, but the tanks have to be stored outside, which does change a bit the weight distribution of boats, and that needs to be designed in. So another message, I think, the use of LNG in shipping, we consider is more of a case for new build, not for retrofits of existing ships. Because really you have to understand that when you build an LNG concept into a boat, you have to take into the considerations the extra volume of tankage, where these tanks have to be, and also the materials and safety precautions you have to insert in the boat, in all the channels, which is normally double wall tubing, etc. But it is an excellent option for new things. This simply gives you the curve, and this I'm just going to go back to it. You know, people can talk about LNG, which is normally we quote at -163 degrees C. Is it one point? But some people talk about cold LNG, saturated LNG. It all depends where you are on the pressure curve. But simply speaking, put it into a container, and it will boil up with time. But we play around this curve, and it's just a simple basic physics. So why I've started out saying it's a cryogenic liquid. You need more space to install it into a boat. You need to take safety precautions. It's probably more only fit for new build boats, but why do we consider it is the future for boats? Well, I think you have to look at the environmental challenges facing the maritime sector. I'm sure that in other talks, people have put up these graphs about eco countries and the reductions in sulfur and NOx in future legislation. Every time the legislation gets more strict, the existing boats on heavy fuel oil have to do changes, whether it's to a different fuel, or it's to add a catalyst, a selective reduction, fuel recycle. And in this case, we believe that natural gas has the composition to actually attack these fuel things. And it's just not in the boat. The other thing I think I'd like just to flag up things, because we often talk about the need to reduce environmental emissions in the shipping. We also need to reduce the emissions associated with ports. First and foremost, a port is a major economic hub of a city. It creates a lot of work. It creates a lot of wealth, and there's a lot of business and heavy movement of goods. But when you look at the emissions, the port, although it generates this richness, is a big source of emissions in a city. If we take these figures from a study made by an institute called Apathy in Barcelona, the port accounted for 16% of the NOx emissions of the Barcelona metropolitan area. And also the small particulate emissions, 23% of those emissions. So here, the ports are working with many companies on many initiatives, but there is a clear challenge to actually reduce emissions within the ports. And when the boat goes into the port, it is connected to the energy section, and the cranes, etc., move to the port. So there's a whole demand and need to reduce emissions. And natural gas, be it CNG, LNG, can contribute to this. Going back to not the previous slide, the slide before, this is the case we set out for LNG as why it is a fuel of the future for long-term shipping. You can see that if in the sulfur emissions, there is 0 SOx emissions from LNG because there's no sulfur in the fuel. If we look at NOx emissions, they are around 80% lower than the IMO set level. The virtually we eliminate a considerable number of the particulates, nearly 100%, and we also can offer CO2 emissions around 20% when compared with HFO, which is heavy fuel oil, depending on its sulfur content. So the driver to bring LNG into the marine section is very much an environmental driver. The fuel is available today, the technology is available today, and a switch to LNG from HFO or even from medium fuel can result in immediate reductions in emissions of gases. We know it's still a thermal fuel. We know it still has a CO2 thermal print, but the technology is there today. And in a very large cruiser, there is no real other option today to make these reductions. Also, there is a question of biomethane, which is there are productions of biomass from water treatment plants, from biomass, from waste disposals where we collect biogas, which is a mixture of CO2 and methane. We can then refine that, and by refineries we separate the CO2 and we can produce biomethane. And that has a very neutral CO2 footprint, and that blending with natural gas results in further CO2 emissions. So that 24% can even be increased with the generally driving of biomethane. The problem with biomethane today, it is expensive to convert biogas into biomethane. We, as many other companies, are working on new technologies to reduce this cost because we see it as an integral part of the future of natural. So let's look at the options in a boat, and this is really all I'm going to really look on this. As we drive forward, as we look at the emission reductions, we believe there's only 3 options. The first is a switch from heavy fuel oil to low sulfur marine gas oil, and with some sort of NOx emission control, which we would imagine is exhaust gas removal, or so recirculation, or selective catalytic reduction, which is the injection of urea, which adds complications in the maintenance of the boat. You could also try to keep heavy fuel oil and add scrubbers, which is a SOx removal system, and then look at a very, very elaborated NOx emission removal. But all this adds expense required in the boat, adds space requirements, and adds considerably to the operational cost. The other message we think was you can make the switch from gas to LNG, understanding its differences and the fact it's a cryogenic fuel, and we've got to develop the standards and develop the infrastructure that's not quite there today, and that will allow us to reduce the emissions. And really, when you look at the use of gas, and now let's be careful here, LNG is the storage medium. But as soon as energy comes out the LNG tank, it passes through an evaporator and it's changed to natural gas. And the motors burn natural gas. They don't burn LNG, they burn gas. And in natural gas, you've basically got 2 types of engines. You've got I'll put it into the car context. You have the petrol engine, which is a spark ignited engine. It means there's a spark plug. The spark causes ignition. In these motors, natural gas can substitute 100%. And then you have the diesel cycle engines, which really, the diesel ignites by compression. Now, natural gas does not ignite by compression, so what happens was you need to put a bit of diesel in to get the compression, and the rest natural gas, and that's a dual fuel engine. But the gas engines exist. Now, quickly looking at the options, I tried to resume them in a fair way in the table against the 3 options that we put there. LNG is on the top, and you can see, as far as we're concerned, it ticks all the boxes on the emissions, far more so than the other fronts. But there is a restriction on load capacity because, as I said, it's less dense than petrol, and less dense than the diesel equivalent. And it's probably the upfront investment cost is higher. Gas engines are more expensive than diesel engines, put it into its context, and the infrastructure for LNG has to be because in the cryogenic part, you need special materials, you need double wall tubes to avoid losses, so the upfront costs are much higher. That's its downside. For the operational cost, because it's a cleaner fuel, the maintenance costs will probably be lower. So we come to the table saying, if your driver is environmental performance, LNG is the optimum fuel, but we need to get around the very high investment cost. We need to have the regulation, the support that permits boat owners that want to buy a boat for 30 years to to be able to take this investment decision. We, as companies and port authorities, we need to make the infrastructures available in port so that the boat owner can actually. So there's a lot to go. We're in a bit of a chicken and eggs scenario because there isn't really the facilities for LNG. There aren't that many LNG boats, but if you look at the code logics of it, the environmental performance of LNG does outperform the other option. How much does gas? Don't see the full question. Somebody's put up a question. Maybe we'll say. If it's about costs, I've got a slide about 2 or 3 further down that will get onto costs.
I will read it for you. How much does cost more gas engine relate to diesel engine?
Depends, and that's let me be conservative. A gas engine will be 25%, and the associated installation could well be 25 to 30% dearer capital cost today. But gas engines aren't made on the same scale as diesel engines, so there could well be economies of scale. But if you look at the life cycle costs, the fuel cost of natural gas is actually today cheaper than diesel. So we're in a scenario where the upfront costs are higher, the operational costs are lower. And over the term, there's been studies done by many organizations. They indicate for a new build boat over a 30-year operational thing, the life cycle cost is cheaper on an LNG boat than on a diesel boat. However, let's put in a conservative nature. I come from a gas company, I want to promote gas, but the difference does reflect on the spread price between diesel, heavy fuel oil and natural gas. And we today know that the price for a barrel is very low. So therefore, the case for LNG is slightly more difficult than economical. But over the years, LNG has proved to be cheaper than diesel, than petroleum products, and its price is a lot more stable, which makes business case that way. Just as a thing to highlight out of the next thing, going back to the things, all I'd like to say is, as I said up front, the methane carrier, we own and operate 9 methane carriers, and these are the boats that transport LNG around the world. These actually burn the boil-off gas as a fuel, and they've been operating for 40 years. So the use of gas in boats is a proven technology. So all this interest has really led to people foreseeing a tremendous increase in LNG. And Sarah, the Cambridge Energy Research Authority, I believe, you've got Lloyd's Register, you've got DNV, that have all set out that the LNG will grow as a tremendous source. And they've all set up that there's actually now 50 ships operating on LNG, and they estimate that over the next 5 years, that's going to jump up to 500 odd ships. So everyone believes that as the environment will be the key driver, as there's an economic argument to be based on natural gas, that it is a growing market and will become more common. In the next few slides, this is time for me to take a bit of a drink of water. All I have put here is just information of the pioneering projects and the gas. I'm not going to go through the slides, but all I want you to see is you look at the pictures. Surely other people have spoken about this, that the boats operating on LNG are major boats of different carriers. A lot of them are ferries, as we can see with the Viking Grace. So LNG is being introduced into an area where there are people. So there's 3 slides of pioneering projects on the horizon. Is all the things, all I want to show with these slides, the boats are being developed. And again, with the next one on the next slide. So this is take a break, take a pause, and we now look at the port case. And let's not forget about the ports. And all I want to do on the ports is that, as I've said to us, there's also an area, if we're going to introduce LNG to refuel the boats, we're in the port area, we also need to use this LNG in a lot of or inclusive CNG, which is compressed natural gas, in various of the infrastructure within the port, the cranes, the shuttle carrier, the straddle carriers, and the stacking cranes. All these elements are heavy diesel burners, are heavy emitters of NOx and particulates, which are identified as being a serious case in the port areas. And all these are very good candidates to switch to gas if there is a supply of gas within that port. So therefore, if in the future world that ships operate on LNG, you need to supply LNG to the ships. LNG will be in the ports, and it will be also available to actually make an added impact and, I won't say clean up, but improve the environmental performance of the port infrastructure. We'll go back to the costs, and I've seen many different cost cases. I put up this case that was actually a study done by Deloitte. At the back of the presentation, I include the references. And this was done by Deloitte, where they looked at a build, it was a new build of a ferry, no, so it was a retrofit of a ferry in this case, but they set out a business case and they looked at the prices of how an LNG versus HFO, heavy fuel oil, or the medium diesel oil would look in cost benefit. I'm going to put the pinch of salt. I love the results because the results show a tremendous advantage for LNG, but I'm also honest enough to say in a forum like this that saving over time will depend on the spread of the fuel price. And in 2014, if you look at the Deloitte study, it's very good. They set out the prices, you can study it, but really what they're saying is today LNG represents a much higher upfront cost, but a much lower operating cost. And over a life cycle of 30 years, it is the cheaper option. But we have to help the boat owners have the confidence to take this bigger investment, and we have to ensure that in the ports where they operate, they're able to refuel their boat. And I'll speak from the Spanish point of view here, if you permit me, because although I'm English, I'll speak from the Spanish point of view. I believe, or the feeling we're getting, being in the business, both at the European Union area and the last 2 points I talk about in the Spanish case, is that we detect that there is increasing support for the use of LNG and CNG in the transport. The Alternative Fuel Directive sets out the requirement to install and have LNG refueling, bunkering, CNG refueling, bunkering. We see that there is improved support because people believe it is a way of getting to this getting to this environmental improvement. It's also fairly cost effective because the life cycle costs are advantage. So it's nearly a win-win case. And we're detecting this political support. And I think like when the organizations make their provisions of increasing market, this is also backed up by this environmental support. So this is a bit of the sell or the introduction to the first part of the talk, to the first part of the natural gas system. It's a business starting off. There is political driver to take it, and we believe that if you look at studies to Deloitte, it could be very good for the economy. So this is a setting out a case for natural gas. This is a sort of my introduction, and now I'm going to move on. I'm going to take a sip of water. No, sorry, I forgot I put this slide in. I'm now going to jump on to look at bunkering and LNG. I simply made up this slide with a sense of telling you where do we fit into the thing. And I hope I've told you we're a gas company, we have tremendous LNG experience. The picture on the left is actually a refueling station on a motorway that refuels LNG. It's one that we've built under one of my projects. But at the end of the day, that's the bunkering station. This station, the LNG is connected to a pump that connects to a vehicle, a heavy goods vehicle, and has a meter. But you could put the hose and connect it into a boat. But there's a tremendous experience. So we are a company that has LNG experience, LNG supplier. We're approaching this as a fuel supplier. And the reason I put the circle around the naval operator, a bit of the equipment suppliers and the port authorities, because if we're going to make this transitional change to another fuel, all parts of this triangle have to work together, because everyone needs to cooperate, everyone needs to talk together. We need to work with the port authorities to make sure that their infrastructure they put in is safe, they put in the right infrastructure. The naval operator needs to be confident that we can supply the fuel at the right price. and the LNG equipment supplier needs to make sure that if he develops the technology further, we will be developing. So we bring experience to the case, and now I'm going to talk about the different aspects of bunkering in the next phase for thinking of ships bunkering. So, as a gas supplier, as an LNG supplier, I'll throw out an opening statement. And we'll be honest here, when we talk about bunkering, as you can see in the 4 pictures, are all forms of bunkering. And bunkering is simply filling up the LNG tank on a boat. It's refueling in the road in the world of roads. It is simply filling up that LNG tank, transferring it from an external vessel into the boat. That is bunkering. For LNG, the standards and the regulations that one needs are still being developed. But we'll be bold enough to say it is not a technical concern. There's enough experience out there, mainly in Norway, but in other countries have done bunkering into boats, and technically everything exists to do that. What doesn't really exist is the infrastructure, but we can do it. The components are there. If there's the will to mount it, we can win it. There's no technical showstoppers. And there are basically 4 alternatives when we look at it. And we need to have a look at it. There are the 4 instances. We can fill the bunker. The bunker vessel can either be from a truck, which is the top right-hand picture of the gas nor truck. It could be a fixed installation, which is the bottom left-hand picture of the boat coming in. Not a great picture, but I'll assure it is that. It could be an ISO container, which is the bottom right, or it could be a boat-to-boat, which is the top left. So let's quickly look at the things and see what we can think about bunkering. And I think we need to, when you talk to say we're going to bunker, I think I need to jump back to say, let's think about LNG in a port. Because many people say the ports, a lot of ports already have regasification terminals. So many ports handle LNG. They receive LNG, the LNG enters into this bunker, into this regasification plant, that then feeds natural gas into the gas grid. Some ports will be able to fill up trucks. So tanker trucks with LNG, which we then could use for bunkering. But let's be honest, these installations are huge installations. They are always located on the extreme part of the port. They're not an area where people go. They're well isolated, and they're an industrial concept. If we now want to bring LNG as a fuel supply to boats, just have a think about it. Suddenly, we will say there's a ferry there that's loading people. We want to fill that up with LNG. We're going to have to bring the LNG all to the people. So we're going to have to bring the LNG to a place where there's public, there's port congestion. And when we look to do bunkering, we now have to change our feeling of LNG. We're no longer in an LNG regasification station which handles huge amounts of LNG, but away from everybody, but isolated. We will handle smaller amounts of LNG, but in an area where there is public, there are goods, there are boats, and therefore we're going to have to ensure when we take out to be LNG, to look to do LNG bunkering or fueling, that we can design the system so that there's no release of LNG or natural gas to the environmental. That is critical. And as a company that we are a utility, but we are the leading utility in the Dow Jones Sustainable Index. To us, that is critical. We cannot emit natural gas or LNG to the environment during the refueling, because all these CO2 savings we pretend to gain in the operation, we will be losing, because methane is a much more aggressive greenhouse gas, some 20. So we need to make sure that we can purge and inertize everything, and there's no LNG. We need to make sure the systems are closed. We need to make sure that they're safe. We need to have the effective security distance. And for this, all the stakeholders, the certifying companies, the port authorities, the gas companies with experience of LNG need to get together, collaborate, and design for the case what is the best way for LNG to be applied to the boat. But we will claim that experience says it can be safe, but it just needs to be done properly and correctly. So first of all, where are we getting the LNG from? Because I said that gas comes from all around the world. And the first thing we send out that one of the stability reasons for LNG is it comes from many countries. Now that small graph on the right that I can't see very well, and I need to put my glasses on, but you will notice there that of the countries, Qatar is a major and Malaysia are two major exporting countries of LNG. And you can see the volume of LNG traded in the graph, and all I'm going to say is the LNG trading is increasing as we see. It has a stable price, and one of the countries, US, which is around 0.3%, is a country expected to grow drastically in LNG exportation, which will probably drive the cost of LNG down. So if we look at the top, we're talking the left-hand image of the platform extracts the gas, we liquefy it. The shipping is one of the huge methane carriers. As we said, we operate 9. We ship it. We take it to an import terminal, which I've been calling the regasification plant, which receives LNG on land and feeds the gas in to the gas distribution and to the end user. All that infrastructure is there today. And the highlight message, LNG comes from various places around the world. Furthermore, this graph may well show it better. It shows the same information as the last time. This comes from the IGU, the International Gas Union, from their 2015 report. I've referenced the report with a web page in there, and you can see all the different LNG plants that exist where it's being exported. And on the next one, this is the current world transport of LNG around the planet. And if you looked in 2014, the longest LNG voyage was done between Trinidad to Japan, some 30 days of shipping. The shortest was done from Spain. It was our boat that went down to Algeria, which was 0.2 of a day, a couple of hours. But LNG is moved constantly around the world in these boats, and therefore is available to be brought into the port. In more so that in a country like Spain, I think I may jump into the next one, this then starts to talk about the gasification hubs, the hubs that receive the LNG for distribution in the country. And the orange ones are those that are actually in operation. And hopefully it comes out there, you'll see there's quite a nice range of LNG regasification stations around Spain. And Spain is one of the world leaders in LNG. We are the third country in the world after Japan and Korea with consumption of LNG. The majority of the natural gas that comes into Spain is LNG. And that is different to a lot of the Northern European countries that tend to receive their natural gas by these vast pipelines coming down from Norway, coming across from Russia, coming up from Turkey. So in Spain, we have a tremendous history of receiving LNG. Also in Spain, Spain is quite a big country on a European basis, but it's not a very densely populated country. So the gas network, the natural gas network, is not that vast. So what we tend to do in Spain is that in these ports around the country, Barcelona, Sagunto, Cartagena, Huelva, Ferrol, Bilbao, and including Sines in Portugal, we then fill up tanker trucks, and each day in Spain, for those that will know, 200 tanker trucks drive around Spain delivering LNG to what we call satellite LNG stations, which points to distribute natural gas locally to a village. So automatically, I think I'd like to give you a message is that we move a lot of LNG. We've had lots of use of LNG. My company, being the gas distributor of Spain, it is a subject that we believe we know a bit about. and we do move a lot of LNG around both the satellite stations to supply local gas distribution nets. We're also in Spain driving the use of LNG in refueling stations, public refueling stations for heavy goods vehicles, and all that technology know-how fits in automatically to the LNG bunkering because it's basically the same technology. So this is why I make out to saying that LNG, we have tremendous experience. And the platform here, did you know, as a question, is that I think twice a week, LNG is shipped from Spain to Italy to service a public refueling station in Italy. So we're well used to doing the transport of that, even though in Italy they have now some LNG refueling stations. And when we talk about this, the large scale are those big plants that are on the ports, but then we can go medium and we've got small scale. It's not a really, it's just, I just put the sizes so that you can understand at a later date when people talk about large scale storage, medium scale, small scale, what we're talking about. But what I'd like to draw your attention to is the photo on the top right. That, I believe, is Barcelona LNG station, and that is refilling a tanker truck. It looks like an ISO container, but it's a tanker truck with LNG that will then drive across Spain or could go to a port and do a truck to ship refueling. So that's the infrastructure, and you can see the shadow of the person taking the photo refilling the truck of LNG. That installation is there and working. So let's look at the four options that I say that exist for LNG. And I think as a message, you know, if there are a vast number of LNG ships, you need to refill them, and these are the four idealized ways of doing the bunkering. Truck to ship, which is a tanker truck, ISO container, which is a standardized container that I'll talk about in a minute, ship to ship, or pipeline. I'm going to call it pipeline, but basically you'll have a satellite station, as I call it, and a pipeline to the boat. First message. People talk about bunkering, people defend different options of bunkering. I believe, and we believe, that each one of those four bunkering, well, three of those four options, we take ISO containers out for the moment, have their advantages and their disadvantages. And depending on the needs of the boat, one of those options will be the ideal option. And what one has to do is look at the boat that needs refueling, the port infrastructure and where it's going to be refueling, and then identify which is the best way to refuel that boat within these options. Each have their advantages, each have their disadvantages. There is no one solution, and the final solution will be a mix and match of those three. This looks a bit like it. If we take a truck to ship, really truck to ship is these small road tankers. There's different figures quoted, but I would say that in a typical trucker that we move around Spain, it has around 48 cubic meters of usable LNG. So that's the amount of LNG you can offload. You never fully discharge an LNG tank, so it's a facet of gas. So for 48 meters cubed each tanker, you can deliver that to a boat. So it's ideal probably for situations that want smaller quantities of LNG up to around 200 meters. It depends on the timing you have for the LNG. I mentioned ISO container. ISO containers are modular containers mounted in a framework of standard size with standard connections. They're very much a plug and play type connection. You take a crane, you lift it on, and it plugs into place. It's not probably the idealized version because you need to have a crane or some sort of tractor to lift up. There are questions, I think, on the legality from the shipping side for the connections of an LNG, of an ISO container, but it is an option. We tend to, in the industry, believe that ISO containers is a great way to move LNG from, for instance, mainland Spain to the Canary Islands. We can fill the LNG up in Spain. In the Canary Islands, they've got no gas facilities, and we just ship it across. And these tankers are mounted on top of each other. So after the ISO, you have the ship to ship. And the ship to ship is with the picture in the middle. It's a way of producing you actually do it from a boat, one boat to another boat. It has the advantage that you're not actually on port land. You're doing it from sea to sea, shall we say, or it's more next door to the boat. You can deliver much higher volumes in a quicker time. So it's expected, I think today, if you speak to all the experts, they would predict that this will be the most common used option. And finally, which is in the bottom right picture, there is a terminal to ship where you actually have an area with the tanks and you have piping to the docking place. You can do very, very high, very, very rapid refuelings, but you need to have an infrastructure on the port, and the boats need to go to that facility. In the boat to boat and ship to ship, the refueling goes to where the boat is moored and docked. In the plant, the shoreside plant, it's obviously you're constructing a service station, shall we say, on the port, and the boats have to go to the service station. But it's suitable for any quantity, and it's very, very high volume. This table on the next slide sets out the advantages of each one, and I hopefully I've said everything there. The other thing, the truck to ship, the tank truck to ship. The tanker is very flexible. It's got a low operation cost. It's much cheaper to buy a tanker truck than to build a ship for LNG refueling and to build a process. But you only do small quantities and lower loading. But the table there looks at the different options. And then what this next table does from a source, it takes out to the question you've got to look at, which is the boat. You'll see that they sets out the table between 1 and 3, with 3 being unsuitable and 1 being most suitable. Obviously, the right refueling option for the boat depends on how much you need to refuel. The other question you have to ask yourselves, how quickly you can refuel. We've had ferry owners coming to us saying they love to get into LNG, but they want to refuel 500 cubic meters in 3 hours of LNG. Just simply, I've just told you that a tanker truck is 48 cubic meters. So that would be 10 tanker trucks would have to pull up and refuel. That's not possible in 3 hours. So you need to adapt. You need to adapt your bunkering option to the time you have available and to the quantity of the fuel that goes out. Let's just quickly go to truck to ship LNG and truck to ship bunkering. And I'm going to say this is the most commonly used method today because there's few boats out there and there's no upfront cost. You go, as the picture shows, with a tanker truck and you offload it. If you look at the first top table, it shows you the time in hours to refill a quantity of gas. So it's just a basic thing here. You've got around 50 cubic meters of gas in the tanker and you need to offload it. Often these tankers have a pump and that pump can deliver 35 cubic meters every hour. So automatically, if you've got 50 meters cubed roughly, you've got a pump that delivers 35 meters cubed, you're going for an hour and a half to offload that tanker truck. So obviously, if you have to load 500 meters cubed, you now need 10 tanker trucks, you're going 12 hours. So it's not an option for that option. Also, let's not forget, it's not a simple question. Your tanker truck pulls up, it connects to the boat, but you need to cool the tubing down, you need to inertize it. So you have also a preparation both before refueling and after refueling that extends the refueling from these trucks. But you can see quite quickly that the tank option there would be excellent for the tug, which would need around two tanker trucks to refill, and you could do it in a quick time. But for the container vessel with the 7,600 cubic meters, forget it. You're talking 211 hours. It's extreme cases, but it's when I go back and say you need to look and develop the right bunkering technology for the right thing. So how do we refuel? This is the question, and it comes out in this graph. And I'm going to be bold because this graph has come out in a journal, and it said this graph does not apply to truck to ship bunkering. And I put it in a slide that says it's truck to ship. And I believe it does apply to truck to ship as well as to the other things. But if we look at it, what sets out the graph is that on the right-hand side, you have the LNG receiving vessel, the LNG tank in the boat. On the left-hand side, you have the LNG to supply to the tank. So the first thing was you have to connect a flexible cable between the two, a flexible pipe. They exist in various sizes with dry discharge connectors, and you connect it together. And you have, well, here you'll see there's ESDs, which is emergency shutdown valves. So there's valving in the two sides. And we actually connect a supply line, which is the bottom line, and a vapor return line, which is the top line. Now, the vapor return line is something that's not in all cases, but we're going to assume that we have a vapor return line. So we make the connections. And the first thing we have to do is inertize the tubing. We need to get the oxygen out of the pipework because gas and oxygen is not a very nice mixture, so we inertize the piping with nitrogen. Then we need to cool the piping down. So we actually blow LNG vapor between the two things to cool down the pipework. And therefore we need materials that the LNG hose is actually double material tubing that can handle the cryogenic liquid, but it's also got to handle the things. When we fill up a boat, the trouble with a boat is the boat is going up and down. When I fill up a lorry, it's still, and it's very simple to refill. But in a lorry, I have to design the tube so it can account for this. If I do boat to boat, I have two moving things, which is more complicated. If I do truck, the truck's fixed on the port, but the boat's moving. And this is what you have to have the sufficient length of pipes. You need to make sure you don't curve the pipes. But you then refill, we cool the pipe down. And then you'll see that there's a submerged LNG pump that goes pump, 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 pumping in a tank truck. It's 30 meters cubed. And there you are. Once you've got to the pressure in the receiving vessel, you shut off the valves, and you have to inertize the tubing again. That's one way of doing it. There is another way of doing it, which is often in tanker trucks. They call it a fast discharge. It doesn't use an LNG pump. What it uses is it uses the vapor return. In the receiving vessel, to refill, you actually open the return line. You drop the pressure in the LNG receiving vessel, the gas goes back to the fueling line, and that drives the refueling to the other tank. It's much quicker. You can do it in under an hour. But it's virtually an all or nothing refueling. The pump, you can fill up a tank of 20 meters cubed, 30 meters cubed. The other way is you take the full tanker. It's much harder to do partial loads, but that's called fast discharge. Now, that is the way it is done in all stations. Most times it's done with a pump. I read an article the other day that in Holland, they decided that they weren't going to use the vapor return hose in this system, and they weren't going to inertize the pipe. And they accepted they had some loss of a methane when they filled from a truck, a tanker truck. Yes, you can do that, but to me, it's just not good practice. You need to put in a bunkering station that has no CH4 loss, and therefore you need the return line. Now, I've said that you need the vapor return line, but there is in the shipping world, in the tanker world, so if you looked at the shipping vessel, there's different types of LNG tanks, and there's what's called a Type C tank, which is a high pressure tank. And in those tanks, you often don't have a vapor return line, and what you do is you drop the pressure in the receiving station. You have a technology to drop the pressure, and you pump against that pressure, and the actual vapor stays in the receiving tank. But that's what we're talking about bunkering. It's a movement of gas between the two vessels. You do it with a pump, and you just pump across. And what is key to this is to have the right materials, the right connectors, and it is key to inertize, and it's a key to purge. And also here, again, it's a key. It's a cryogenic liquid. So the people have to have the right safety gear, they have to have gloves, they have to have face masks, and anyone who operates it has to be trained. But with the right training, you can do bunkering perfectly safely. You can do bunkering without methane losses if you have the nitrogen inerting, if you have the methane there. But it's a procedure where it's not like a diesel where you simply put the plug in, open the thing and go chug, 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 virtual. This is a bit more processed in the process because we have to inertize the tubing, we have to pre-cool the tubing before we transfer the fuel. So it's slightly more complicated. But hopefully it's not rocket science, but it just needs the right formation, and we need to take into account that LNG is cryogenic. If you have an LNG spillage, it can burn, it can crack mild steel. So all the measures, double wall tubing has to be put into measure, shutdown valves, the ability to shut the refueling from both the ship side and from the bunkering facility, all that needs to be worked on, agreed on, and included in the actual regulation. So that's all there is to bunkering, nothing more. Quickly, I'll go through the other options. You've got the ISO containers. All an ISO container is basically, and you see it on the left, it's an LNG container of standard size mounted in a standard framework to load on a lorry. The picture on the right shows it filling up from a satellite LNG station, and these are very much you lift on, you lift off. I don't really foresee they have much future in refueling because they tend to take up more space. There is a question of connecting and pre-connecting virtually on the boat, which is more complicated, rather fueling can be done from a connection at the side of the boat. The boat, it's the same concept as a tanker truck, but basically has more volume of LNG and bigger pumps. We want complete. It can deliver a lot more LNG. It needs to be bigger because the price of building one of these boats is a lot more than the price of buying a tanker truck, so you need a demand for the LNG. One of its great advantages, if you imagine a ferry ship docked up with people coming up from the port, this boat would be the other side, away from people, refilling. The added complication, which I tried to explain before, maybe you can see on the top left picture, where you see the flexible tubes connecting into the boat, is you've got two movable objects. Both go up and down on the wave of the water, and you need to have sufficient flexibility in the same. So it has to be designed in such a way that there's enough flexibility. And finally, you have the ship-side installation. This is a better picture of what we can see. This is an installation in Norway. If we look at the left-hand side, it's the same concept. You have two big LNG tanks, which are there on the red circle, the yellow circle. You have a pipeline to the boat, and you refill in. It's often wise to have that pipeline as short as possible for cost reasons, and you need to have the infrastructure and the logistic to fill up the satellite station. You can achieve very, very fast filling requirements. And taking this one step forward, the picture on the right is really a drawing concept. It's a floating refueling station. But at the end of the day, it's like a petrol station. You have the LNG stored in a tanker, you have a tube, you have a pump and a tube to connect it. We just complicate the thing a bit more by having the ability to inertize the gas and cool down the tube. And that's all there is. And really where we're actually working on this. We need to work on the regulation so that we know that there is the right regulation in place. We actually participate in the ISO committees, which is the International Standards Organization, and we're also participating in the Spanish development. Key issues for us, because at the moment the ports need to have these standards to know what they need to do in the infrastructure and the refueling. The experience to date, the bunkering has been increasing, and there's been no bad experience. It's been done well. You can do it. Now, in the next slides, I'm going to change the tone completely, because on the last comment I say it's also backed up from the road transport. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flick to a project that we did for heavy goods vehicles. And I'm going to quickly show you what we did and show the refueling stations. And please take into mind the same process. But this is a project we did. It was a European project we did with a partner where we set out to develop LNG as a fuel for heavy goods vehicles. It's a project we've now finished where we put 4 public, I'll put connotations under public use stations to fill a truck with LNG. So for the LNG trucks that are now in Spain, these are public stations that the driver could go to and refuel. Now, by being public, I'm going to put a caveat in on that statement. Every driver that could use our stations had a card to authorize the refueling, and that card meant that he or she had gone through the right training. But once they'd got their training certificate, they could use our stations, and they're self-service, which means the driver of the lorry refuels, as he would do with diesel. So automatically think like we're doing a form of smaller scale bunkering on the road, and it's self-service. So quickly go through the project. These are the different elements of a station. I'm not going to go through it. Our stations actually supply LNG and CNG, but you have the LNG tank on the left, and then you could either deliver it by a pump, a compressor, and you have an LNG, sorry, a mistake there, but it's an LNG dispenser. No, nothing different. Change that LNG as it's put there, LNG dispenser, for a hose connection to a boat, and you have the process of bunkering. And oops, jumped over too many slides. So that's the Garnet project, and this is the map. And these, we put 4 stations in these roads in Spain. So they're in roads and they're operating. They each have around a 60 cubic meter tank. If you look at the top left where it says Eurocam, you can see the tank, you can see the evaporator next door to it, the lorry, and he fills up. And these 4 stations are in operation today. We move LNG around in Spain to deliver that to those stations. We also did mobile stations. And these are like little tankers that you move to do bunkering that we moved around Spain. But the difference to a tank for a naval bunkering, they have actually a fuel nozzle and a way of paying for your LNG on the back of it, like a petrol. So removable petrol station. So we put out these stations, we moved them around the current to supply the different drivers. And this is LNG. You can see the LNG tanker, they're slightly small scale, but we moved it between Madrid. It went to Valencia port. And we actually did a project called Green Cranes in Valencia port with these tanker. Came back, I used the results, and it's now north of Madrid. So these are going around the road where people are, and they're refilling quite safely. And what we did for the project, because what the Commission asked us to do was, was to develop or demonstrate their operation, and they came out and said, we want you to show some KPIs, key performance indicators for these stations. And we developed a whole range of key KPIs for the station, based from a fueling station point of view, a truck point of view, and a customer point of view. But I just want to look at the fueling station point of view. And I'm going to look at the safety. We had no accidents in any of those stations. No accidents with drivers refueling. They were able to in the time of working, and they were available. That's a very strong message. Safe and available. So the technology is there. We also looked at the fueling time between that and a diesel, and the fueling time was as quick as a diesel. Where it fell down a bit was we had what we call successful attempts to fill. Now, when you refill one of these lorry stations, at the bottom you'll see a reference to the Spanish Gas Association. If you click on that or go to that site, there's a video from my company, so you have to ignore the first 2 minutes of publicity of gas natural fenosa, but it then shows you somebody refueling a station. So it shows you a driver turning up, putting in his business card, which is his authorization to use the station because he's been trained. He then goes and puts a face mask on and gloves because he's a cryogenic user. He has to earth the vehicle, so he has an earth cable that he connects to the chassis. He then has to connect the vapor return cable because there's no methane emissions. And then he connects, it's called a JC Carter type connector in us. He clicks in and connects to the vehicle. He presses a button, and 6-7 minutes later, well, it can mean before in Murillo, it's full. And it just does the reverse process. What we found was that because fleet owners tend to move their drivers around, if a driver has LNG's new and starting up business, occasionally he forgot to earth the truck. So therefore, it didn't allow him to fill at the station. It didn't allow him to fill. And that's an unsuccessful fueling. So we've improved training, but we need familiarity. And this is a question. If somebody gets trained and then only refills 2 times, he forgets to connect the earth, he doesn't connect that, but the station doesn't give him an LNG. So there's no safety issue. It just tells him to go back and reconnect. But the upfront message, please take the upfront message, LNG is on the side of public motorways, it's growing on the side of public motorways, it's in trucks, there's a huge business in the US being owned and operated safely, which means you can bunker ships quite happily. So final remarks about this. We need standards, not from our side, from a fuel supplier, but from the port side. At the moment, the port authorities have no standards to say how they will permit people to refuel LNG. They want to do it 2 meters away from the person, or there can be no people within 100 meters of the LNG refueling station. So we need procedures and standards, which means that these are well contrasted and everyone can put them into place, and we need to show that they're cautious. We upfront, different types of vessels will require different bunkering locations and solutions, depending on the tank, the time to refill, and that means that there's options for all different locations. Different locations, different bunkering solutions. We've got to get the bunkering time quick, but it has to be safe. And we also got to ensure that we were arguing for this very strongly, is that, as I've said before, there need to be no methane emissions. So the current that refuels the tank, the methane that's there that gets evaporated when you start to cool goes back to the tanker, and he is the owner of that methane, and he has to take it and inject it into the gas grid or do what. He cannot just emit it to the atmosphere. And at the end of the day, we need complete partnership between all the stakeholders to ensure that we can do this well, safely, and really that's been my overview of the bunkering. What I'm going to do now, just to wind up in the last 5-10 minutes, is I'm going to just run through a few projects that we've done as a company. And they're projects that I run myself, just to show you the sort of projects that we are doing, or to go through one project in particular. And this project in particular is the Abu Matutis ferry. It's said in the first saying, we've started a project up in the port, in the Barcelona port, and the company called Valeria, which is a ferry operator in the Mediterranean, I think also in the Caribbean. It's a boat, it's a ferry this ferry does Barcelona to Menorca, the Balearic Islands, and also does Valencia. It does sort of triangle route. And we are going to install on it, and this boat is actually a schematic setup. If you see my mouse, but if you see that blue hump at the back, which is going to be the container we're now adding to the ship, we're going to add an LNG engine, a gas engine, dedicated gas engine, an LNG tank, and all the pipe work to refuel it from the port side, connect it to the connection, do all the safety equipment for auxiliary supply. Understand, it's not a propulsion engine. It will just supply the electrical surfaces, the cooling, the heating when the boat is ready in port. So Barcelona port is supplying with us, because if you remember when I said there's a need to reduce emissions in the port, this will just be an auxiliary engine supplying the services within port to reduce NOx and those particles. But what we wanted to do with this project is the first ship operating in the Mediterranean that will have LNG. So all the installation applies to a propulsion engine. So we're working with Bureau Veritas, gets a certifier, certifying the standards, the rules, so that the national Spanish flag carrier will certify the project. And this will be the first LNG experience, I believe, in the Mediterranean area. Even though it's not propulsion, it's addressing many of the key issues. And we hope to have the boat in operation by 2015. To give you an idea of the boat, it's a ferry. It's quite a big one. I'm no expert in boats, but it's an area that has a lot of meters that moves trucks and lorries between the mainland and the islands. It has 300 passenger cabins. It's not a toy boat. It is a ferry. It's a commercial ferry. It's a ferry where there's going to be lots of people and lots of goods, and it will have LNG on it, which we think will be. And really what we're going to do is where I've drawn the blue line there, we're lifting a motor on the top, we're lifting a 30-meter cubed, it's going to be a small 30-meter cubed LNG tank, and that will supply the boat when it's manoeuvring in the port. We're even considering sending a tube line from the gas to a gas pipe to the boat when it's docked. That's something we'd like to do as a trial, but it's not the object of it. As you can see, the motor is a Rolls-Royce Bergen, it's a dedicated gas motor. You see the motor being lifted onto the ferry, which was in the last months. If you look at the picture below there, the white picture, the white is the LNG tank. For those that follow the news, that huge bridge behind it will tell you where we're doing the works. Because this is the huge build, the bridge they just built down in Cadiz. So it's actually in Cadiz being installed. You see the LNG tank, and you see on the bottom right hand where the bridge. This rusty container will be this sexy bluely painted housing once we get the paintwork done, but the work's ongoing. But please note, it's just not the engine and the LNG. You've got to put the cooling, the seawater cooling loop in. You've got to put the firework prevention, ventilation, instrument air. All this is going on within this project. So it's a full and pucker installation. It will be operated from the boat control room as any injuries, and we believe hopefully will contribute to a very positive LNG thing. The bunkering, we're going to do truck to ship, as I said, 30 meters cubed. A tanker truck is 48 meters cubed. You can refill that tank in 1 hour with a pump of 35 meters cubed. But what we're doing here, which is slightly different, we're going to install on the port side what we call a bunkering facility. And all the bunkering facility is that we're going to have a roll of the flexible tube stored there. We're going to have the fire prevention equipment. So the tanker will not need to have the tubing to go. It's got to go by considerable height to refill the boat. That will actually be on port side. But we also have inertization, nitrogen supply, so that there is no methane losses and returns. So this is what we're building at the moment. We hope to get this going with the Barcelona project. It's fortunately been now this year got supported by the CEF, the Connecting European Framework project, and hopefully this will give a good feeling and a good starter for LNG in the Mediterranean. Other things we're doing, let's not forget, obviously, we've just started a project in Barcelona to convert a straddle carrier. This is one of these funny container cranes to natural gas. And as a company, we're connecting in. And with that, I will go to my final reflections. I hope you're still there, and I hope you've enjoyed the talk. It's been a general talk. I'm not going into a lot of detail because it's quite hard to go into detail over a computer and whatever. But as some final conclusions, they're there written. I don't really need to say them, but let's say we believe LNG is viable, it's efficient, and it's environmentally friendly. We believe all the technology chains exist and have been demonstrated, and we believe there's sufficient gas out there to supply over the long thing. Obviously, we need technological developments because that will improve the performance of the motors, but we also need clear cooperation between all the actors, and really we need political support to justify the initial high investments and to get over a chicken and egg situation where we need to both construct new boats and the refueling infrastructure. And with that, I think I'm open to any questions.
There's one question. Michele Laviola is asking, sorry, but I did not understand about the need of nitrogen during the bunkering.
Okay, we take it round. You understand me. We go to the back end of the thing is, we have an LNG tank on the truck or in the boat. we have the LNG tank on the thing, and we pull across a flexible pipeline between the two tanks, right? And they're connected via shut-off valves. In that pipeline, you have oxygen. Gas in oxygen is explosive. So we pump nitrogen through it first to remove any oxygen. That's the denatization that we do at the beginning. Then we cool it down. At the end of the process, we also to avoid any methane, because when you stop refilling, so you imagine you refill, you shut the valves off because the tank is full, that's received it, but you've still got methane in that tube connecting the tanker, the supply tank, to the fueling tank. And we blow nitrogen to blow that methane back in, not to have any methane emissions. So we use nitrogen both to remove the oxygen prior to the refueling, and then to blow back any methane so that there is no methane emissions when we disconnect the tube. Hopefully that answers you.
It is answered.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I'm sure that there will be contact details for me circulated with the presentation. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Goodbye.